Bioshock, with its 3 installments in the main franchise, has, for all intents and purposes, solidified itself as one of the greatest and most beloved series in all of gaming, or at least to those who have actually played it. From its inception in 2007 to its final installment in 2013, Bioshock has managed to remain a game still talked about 10 years later. Hell, it's approaching 20 years in the first game's case. And with each installment in the series, Bioshock not only managed to continue to deliver, whether it be on story, gameplay, hell, reinvention, but also delivers an experience time after time that felt wholly unique while still holding true to the things that made Bioshock so special. So in that spirit, I wanted to go back and play all 3 of the games again and see what each individual Bioshock game did the absolute best in the series. And to keep it interesting, we're gonna omit the more simple answers. Best story might have been a bit harder to place this time around, but best gameplay could have had a more decisive winner, so where's the fun in that? So what does each Bioshock game do the best in the series? Let's find out, and as always, if you have your own list, let me know down below. I'd love to hear it. The original Bioshock has so much to offer packed into a relatively short runtime. Sitting around 9 to 10 hours long, Bioshock manages to introduce you to an absolutely marvelous setting, wildly unique mechanics, and utterly unforgettable characters. But what does it do solely better than any other game in the series? I feel like it would be easy to just say setting, as after all, Bioshock introduces us to the city of Rapture for the first time, but I think just saying setting alone undersells a lot of what Bioshock really did. So for me, Bioshock undeniably nails one thing above all else, and that's immersion. From the second the plane hits the water till you finally return to the surface, Bioshock immediately sucks in the player and never lets them go. Part of this massive level of immersion is the setting, story, and situation we found ourselves in. The fact that you are just as confused as Jack as to what exactly happened here, why we are here in the first place, and how the hell we're supposed to get out. And the story and world of Rapture isn't just spoon-fed to you. In fact, if you really want the full picture of how it became what it is when we arrive, you have to go looking for those answers yourself. Atlas exists to give context to the now and explain some, but not all, of the total downfall of Rapture. He more acts simply as a guide to navigate the sunken city in its dystopian state. And he isn't constantly there to be that guide. There are long stretches where you are left to navigate and fight or sneak your way through the zones and horrific destruction of a city that was built beneath the sea. So with Atlas acting as this pseudo-guide through a ruined apocalyptic nightmare that, as far as we are aware, we have just stumbled into. And on top of that, you encounter so many things, so many people that on one hand contradict what we are being told by the only voice that reached out to help us, while at the same time confirming the vision of Andrew Ryan that has been spun to us by Atlas. And it breeds this feeling of genuine confusion and curiosity that just pulls you deeper and deeper into the game. What happened on New Year's Eve? Who is Frank Fontaine? What was Dr. Suchong's hand in the Big Daddy and Little Sister program? Why is Tenenbaum so hell-bent on saving these twisted creatures Atlas seems so keen for us to consume for Adam? And it's not just that curiosity alone. The setting of Bioshock, namely Rapture itself, really aids in this whole upper level of pure game immersion. Rapture in and of itself is a crazy setting, a sprawling metropolis at the bottom of the sea built on principles that the surface would likely call extreme. No real ethical guidelines to experimentation and science, little regulation on how the citizens make a fortune or simply a living, no limits to the arts and expression, and a real exile of religion and anything resembling a government. In all reality, Rapture was the Wild West in terms of its rules, and what the game keeps calling you back to is that it was working in a sense. Rapture once was and appeared to be a utopian city when you were looking at it from a surface level. So as you take down the bathysphere for the first time and hearing all the great things Rapture stands for and what it has accomplished, only to find terror, destruction, violence, and a city that is quite literally bursting at the seams in places is utterly engrossing. I still vividly remember my first playthrough of this game and stepping into the first areas, meeting my first splicers and big daddies, only to think, what the fuck happened here? And it caused hours of exploration on my first playthrough, searching every corner, hacking every safe, picking up every audio log, just begging for answers. And that's another thing. I think Bioshock is the only game that when I picked up an audio log, I made sure the area was clear of enemies so I could stop and really listen to every word that came out of them. And God, Bioshock did this beautifully. The audio logs range from happier reencountments of dinner parties, shopping sprees, and all the great things that come from the golden age of utopian rapture to these horrific panicked recordings during the fall and all the panic and confusion that comes with it. Hell, even some portray the madness that aided in the downfall. The real story of Rapture is painted so beautifully through the audio logs, which in and of themselves essentially are a side objective that feels almost mandatory if you want the full picture of what happened here. And honestly, saying a full picture is a little bit liberal there. There are still holes and gaps in between each individual audio log, but that's not necessarily a downside because it just provides that much more mystery and again has you searching around every corner. Careful though, there might be a splicer around it. The combat and physical gameplay is also a huge add to this feeling of immersion. Getting attacked when your back is turned or when you least expect it really adds to that desperate feeling of rapture that is so apparent by just looking at the place. It's dying and struggling to hold itself together, and the citizens portray that as well. The now twisted and manic splicers that were once citizens of the utopia are desperate for every drop of atom they can get their hands on and are willing to kill anything to get it. Hell, even risking attacking a little sister knowing Papa might be right beside her. And just to add to that, the fact that there's not a limited amount of enemies per level is amazing. If you clear out a hallway only to backtrack later, you will more than likely encounter more enemies scrounging whatever supplies they can find. And the second they see you, it's a shrill shriek or a babbling of incoherent sentences as they attack you without provocation. It leaves you one choice: shoot, shock, or whack your way through, as from the very moment you step forth into Rapture, you are forced to fight for your life and survival, all the while wondering why. Bioshock is such an insanely immersive experience, all packed into what amounts to a 10-hour game. And honestly, there is probably stuff I left out, like Survivor dialing up the lack of bullets, making every shot count, or the fact that the entire fate of Rapture is left to your choices, and until the very end of the game, you don't really know what those choices really meant. Bioshock is a masterpiece that I think everyone should play at least once. The first playthrough is second to none in terms of experience, but what's absolutely wild is somehow they managed to do it twice. Bioshock 2 was the biggest surprise for me in the series. Honestly, I put off playing it longer than I should have because, I mean, really, how the hell are you going to beat the first game? What could you possibly do? After all, it was set in the same place with the same concept, so to me, I was worried it was going to be a downgrade and harm the series trying to live up to the masterpiece that was Bioshock. Spoiler, I was so goddamn wrong. Bioshock 2 in every sense is a worthy successor to the Bioshock title, and that's mainly because above all else, to me, Bioshock 2 has the best polish out of the entire series. Let me explain. So, in Bioshock 2, we find ourselves back in Rapture with the same core mechanics, guns and plasmids. But this time around, we find ourselves able to wield both simultaneously. In Bioshock, you needed to switch between using your plasmids and using your gun or wrench, and in turn, this took a bit away from the stress of a surprise attack. You're no longer frantically swapping between defensive and offensive options, but this allowed the enemies to be stronger, faster, and all around a lot more erratic, kind of bringing back those overwhelming moments that you lost while you had to switch between your gun and plasmids. And this change is kind of what I mean by polish. They made an improvement to the combat style, one that would have trivialized the fights in original Bioshock with its slower enemies, but in the same breath they dialed up the enemies in Bioshock 2 in terms of variety and difficulty. The developers took the time to not only add a quality of life change, but also take a step back and consider how this change affected the gameplay and made the necessary adjustments to really not lose any of the core feeling in Bioshock 2. And that isn't the only heavily polished change they made. For one, the drill weapon. As in this installment, you play as an Alpha Series Big Daddy, so I mean, come on, man's got to has a drill. And this added a whole new movement aspect that just feels smooth and so satisfying to fly across a hallway and utterly devastate the poor splicer who happened to be in front of you. On top of that, the shooting was just silky and responsive to a point that you could really pull off some quick headshots in an otherwise overwhelming situation. And I don't know know if it's true, but they felt more impactful when they landed here, like a significant damage spike when you managed to hit it, something that I was never quite sure on in the original Bioshock. Then after that, you have the limitation of 5 health and Eve packs. In the first game, you could carry 9, and once you had enough health upgrades, you really always found yourself in a massive surplus. But here in the second installment, while on the one hand you are literally a walking tank, they made the decision to scale up the damage quite a bit and at the same time drop your access to healing down, so you really did need to think about dealing with certain encounters carefully to minimize the total drain of your supplies. And hell, before I forget, games usually don't give you a reason for random damage spikes in the gameplay. Hell, half of the time level to level when things start getting harder, it can quite literally be just for scaling with the game. But Bioshock 2 actually gives you a randomly good reason. Since the events of Bioshock 1, Adam has become more scarce, and with the ever-growing desperation of the splicers, they had to figure out a way to more effectively take down Big Daddies in order to harvest the Adam from the little sisters they guarded. And that is verbally stated within the game, and it makes sense in the context of the story. I just thought that was a cool add. Instead of just harder because it's the second game, again, they took that additional step and gave legitimate reason to the change. Same when it comes to the little sisters. The protagonist from the first game, Jack, was largely responsible for the real end of that program, so there being more little sisters here in Bioshock 2 really could have been chalked up to a complete cop-out of, oh yeah, he missed some. But no, they worked it into the story that little girls are going missing from the surface, and it really makes for some of the more depressing aspects of the story this go around and its audio logs, especially hearing the accounts of parents coming down to Rapture looking for their child, only to find a twisted monstrosity that they don't recognize. And how the little sisters were handled in general in Bioshock 2 was a pretty large improvement in my opinion. It wasn't just kill the Big Daddy, harvest, or save her. Now you actually had to experience being her protector if you wanted to go the good route. You had to bring her to Adam-rich bodies and defend her while she harvested it. It made the choice to harvest or save them a lot more impactful, because to save her, you needed to take the time away from your goal, and it wasn't an insignificant amount of time either, or on the flip side, harvest her on the spot and get to Eleanor faster. There was the morally wrong option that was quicker and easier, or the morally right option that was significantly harder and took far longer. Then you have the Big Sisters, an occasional boss fight that had me terrified every time you heard that screech. And not because they were necessarily scary, honestly that was one aspect of Bioshock 2 that wasn't as much in the foreground. No, the Big Sisters were terrifying because these fights were hard on supplies. On top of not being able to carry as many healing supplies, a Big Sister fight at the wrong time could potentially drain all of your resources. This gave a whole feeling of never really being in a huge surplus and made the player have to explore Rapture a bit more to refill, and by association gave them more opportunities to make the maps bigger with more corridors and areas to explore that didn't feel entirely pointless. You do need them, especially in the harder difficulties. I guess the point I'm trying to make is it seems that no matter what the game improved upon from its predecessor, it wasn't just a change to improve a single thing. Every change feels like it perfectly fits itself with another to provide such a level of improvement with no real downside associated. The only way I can really describe it is polished. And that goes for the story as well. The fact that they were able to tell another story of this magnitude off the back of what was already quite the masterpiece in Bioshock is a testament to all those who worked on this game. Instead of confusion and lost in a city you know nothing about, we are in the shoes of someone who knows Rapture like the back of their hand. Instead of fear and terror around every corner, we quite literally get to play as the thing that every splicer used to run from. And instead of mindlessly following orders and calling into question the nature of choice, and if you ever really had one in the first place, you play as a man with one singular purpose and the freedom to choose how he achieves that goal. Whether or not at the end of it all you are able to live with the consequences your choices bring is up to you. Bioshock 2 is one of the most polished games I have ever played. End to end, it's as close to perfection as I think anything out there has any right to be, let alone it being a sequel to the mastery that was the original Bioshock. And that's not even accounting for the DLC. Minerva's Den broke my freaking heart. Bioshock Infinite is not exactly a game I was all that fond of when I first played through it. I'll be the first to admit it, I had a massive bias after playing Bioshock 1 and 2 through again, then immediately jumping into Infinite and latching onto whatever conceived problems I had with the game, mainly the hand thing, because it simply wasn't what I was used to. I think the romance I had with Rapture as a setting, while it was getting close to running its course, just had me in the headspace at the time of, well, it's not underwater, so me no like. But as I've sat with the game and given it quite a few more plays, I don't think I hold that opinion anymore. There's a lot to love about Infinite, and a lot of that comes from the fact that Infinite feels very much like Bioshock, but at the same time it isn't. So the one thing that I believe Bioshock Infinite does the best in the series is the imagination behind it. Now, before you click off the video, let me explain. I am not saying that Bioshock 1 and 2 lack imagination. Hell, the concept of Rapture in Bioshock itself isn't something I could come up with if you gave me 1,000 years. But the fact that Infinite managed to give us a bona fide Bioshock experience, complete with all the bells and whistles you would expect to find, without it feeling like a cheap rehashing of the original Bioshock, is wildly impressive. By all right, Infinite could have easily felt like that, considering at first glance it appears to just be the opposite of everything from the original game, but some freaking how, it never feels like a copy with a new coat of paint. No, Infinite manages to feel just familiar enough to get the point across that this is still a Bioshock game, while simultaneously changing and taking enough risks to make it wholly unique and feels overall imaginative to me, walking that fine line between same old story and whole new thing. Take, for instance, the combat. Bioshock's combat in the first two games was built around constantly carrying every weapon you had available to you, which, for a genetically engineered human and a hulking behemoth of an Alpha Series Big Daddy, hey, it kind of fit. In Infinite, no, you're just Booker, a human, and a wildly underprepared one at that. So rather than always having every weapon at your disposal at all times, you feel like you're scrambling around picking up whatever drops in front of you as needed as you are left to mow down hordes of soldiers. And that's another thing. In a lot of respects, Bioshock can be considered a horror game with its macabre creatures known as splicers pouncing on you from a dark corner or falling from the ceiling. But here in Infinite, you aren't fighting a bunch of Adam-addicted monsters. You're fighting people and soldiers and mechanical constructs of war. And rather than an addiction of a physical nature, these people are devoutly driven by the words of the prophet, Father Comstock. I guess a different form of addiction when you think about it. The point I'm trying to make here is, with having that winning formula through Rapture and Ryan or Lamb's vision of tomorrow, taking that concept and flipping it on its head in nearly every aspect, while somehow feeling like it's its own thing entirely, is extremely difficult in my opinion, and takes quite a bit of planning and imagination to not have it feeling stale or at worst a quick cash grab building off the backs of masterpieces. At no point does the term spin-off come to mind. Sure, there are callbacks to the original games in places, but it doesn't take away from this new version of Utopia that Bioshock chooses to take on. And in that regard, the story, God, alright, the story really tried to do a lot with its concepts of multiple timelines, paradoxes, and the concept of choice and consequences across the multiverse. Now, is it absolutely perfect? No, not really. These types of concepts tend to invite a lot of things like plot holes and just shoving stuff under the rug whenever it's convenient. Kind of comes with the territory of these concepts. But hell, to have the imagination to look at what up until this point was a winning formula and say, nope, I want to try something new, I have a lot of respect for it. They probably could have just introduced another one of Ryan's rising stars or friends, or hell, just someone who managed to take over after Lamb, and it could have worked. Definitely would have felt a bit overplayed by then, but I think people would have still ate it up. But instead, they chose to take to the skies and completely flip the narrative, flip the combat's basic structure, rework how Vigors can operate defensively, and write what I have come to actually rather enjoy, a solid story for its concept. I think at the end of the day that at least needs to be respected. Regardless of your or my personal feelings towards the game on initial play, the risk they took to reimagine a masterpiece I will always applaud. Well, that's about it from me. Hey, if you have your own ideas on what each Bioshock game does the best in your opinion, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Or, secondary question, do you think we're ever gonna get another Bioshock game? And no, I don't mean another remake. Honestly though, hell, I might even just take that at this point. Anyway, see ya.